The problem isn't that the subconscious exists. The problem is if you don't master it, it will master you. And the most dangerous part? It doesn't dominate through force, but through silent agreement, where you believe, this is just how I am. But you are not a sum of reflexes. You are someone who can choose again if you become conscious enough to see what is reflex and what is choice. To do that, you must bring these subconscious programs into the light of awareness. Journaling, tracking your reactions, noticing sensations, asking where does this reaction come from, and what is it trying to protect? These are powerful tools. The subconscious doesn't fear your anger. It fears your clarity. Because once you see it clearly, it can no longer control you. You can begin choosing responses instead of reacting. You can begin designing instead of replaying. The true journey of growth is not about becoming stronger, but becoming clearer. It's about having enough light to see what is truly you and what was programmed long ago. It's about having the courage to step out of old roles, not because they were bad, but because you no longer belong to them. And then you are no longer an actor led by a hidden director in the dark. You become the director of your own story, not through force, but through the light of awareness. Emotions never arise randomly. Every emotional state is a signal of something occurring inside you, something that needs to be noticed, not controlled or denied. The problem is, most of the emotions you experience daily are not reflections of present reality, but activations of replicas from the past. A casual comment that makes you angry may not be because the words were harsh, but because they touched an old wound. A silence that triggers panic might not stem from the current situation, but from a memory of abandonment. So to master your emotions, it's not enough to just calm down. You must accurately identify the emotional layer you're facing, and more importantly, trace it back to where it first began. Every time you overreact is an opportunity to look deeper into your subconscious. It's not just current anger. It could be unacknowledged hurt from years ago. It's not merely a feeling of being disrespected. It's an invisible fear that your self-worth is being threatened. Present emotions are only the surface, but if you're ruled by them, you'll unconsciously react the same way you always have. And like that, you're pulled into the same old emotional loop, reliving memories you should have long escaped. Emotional mastery does not mean eliminating emotion. It means seeing it clearly without being swept away. It's the ability to pause for a split second and ask, what am I really feeling? Not just shouting or bracing through it. It's being lucid enough to recognize, this is old insecurity surfacing. This isn't the other person's fault. It's my unhealed feeling of abandonment. When you identify the root cause, you create distance from the wave. And from that distance, you gain the power to choose your action instead of reacting by default. An emotionally mature person isn't someone who's always cheerful, but someone who can be present with their emotions without being consumed. They might feel anger but not lash out. They might feel anxious but not let it dictate behavior. They might feel sadness but not rush to numb it with consumption, avoidance, or blame. They stay centered inside even when the surface ripples. That is the strength of someone who knows emotion is data, not a direct. When a strong emotion arises, you don't need to defeat it. You only need to stay long enough to understand where it comes from. Anger, when held in silent observation, can reveal a sense of injustice. Jealousy, when seen without judgment, can point to a forgotten longing. Every emotion, when met with wholeness and sincerity, carries a message. And if you're patient enough to listen instead of react, you'll no longer be dragged by emotion. You'll walk with it as an ally. Mastering emotion is also mastering the nervous system, because emotion doesn't only live in the mind, it's stored in the body. A tight chest, a stiff neck, a discomfort in the stomach. If you ignore these biological signals, you miss the chance to stop unconscious reactions before they erupt into behavior. When you learn to feel your body, you can detect early signs. I'm getting triggered. And just a deep breath, a soft muscle release, a pause with your hand on your chest, is enough to bring consciousness back, to disrupt the old chain reaction. True freedom doesn't mean being emotionless but not being ruled by emotion. You can't avoid hurt. You can't stop others from saying things that upset you, but you can choose not to let the past dictate how you live today. You can choose not to retaliate just because it was your 10-year-old reflex. You can choose not to run from opportunity because you once failed. Every time you remain present when emotion rises is a moment you free yourself from old chains. If you've ever wondered why change feels impossible despite understanding the theory, examine how you relate to emotion. It's not that you don't know what to do, it's that every time emotion surges, you fall into the old loop. Feel, react, regret, repeat. Only when you become present enough to notice the gap between emotion and action can you begin to design a new response. That gap, when widened enough, becomes the place where you reclaim your deepest freedom, the freedom to choose yourself beyond the shadow of the past. No one lives a life without ever being fractured. Every painful experience, every moment of rejection, every time you had to suppress your true emotions to be accepted, each created a small part of you that separated from your whole. It might have been a child who was too sensitive, laughed at, or forced to grow strong too early. These parts, though forgotten, still live quietly within you, and at some point they rise in a sudden reaction, in a seemingly irrational fear, or in a hollowness you can't explain. This fragmentation doesn't make you weak. It's simply the residue of how you learn to survive. But living in fragmentation is a subtle kind of loss. You might be competent, successful, well-mannered, even admired, and still feel as though something is off, like you're not truly living as your full self. Because when parts of you go unacknowledged, they operate silently in the dark. A person who is overly rational might be hiding an emotional part that never felt safe. A chronic people pleaser might be running from a bold part that was once silenced. The more you live away from these parts, the more you lose connection with yourself and gradually your sense of wholeness. Integration does not mean becoming perfect. It means no longer rejecting any part of yourself. It means daring to go within, sit down with every former version, every wound, every naive longing, and say, I see you. I won't abandon you anymore. That recognition is the first step toward transformation. When you stop running, the fragmented parts can return, and you begin to live as a unified being, not a collection of performances. What's crucial to understand is fragmentation isn't your fault. It's a survival mechanism. There were times you had to suppress emotion to be loved, moments you had to armor up to protect your dignity. Those parts that were put away saved you from harm. But now, as an adult, no longer needing the same defense, continuing to push them aside only extends the disconnection. Integrating the self means letting go of outdated strategies and replacing them with loving honesty toward yourself. The question is no longer, how do I get rid of fear, anger, weakness? But rather, can I hold space for these parts without being ruled by them? When you're strong enough to stay with your rawest feelings, without flinching, judging, or identifying with them, you become the leader of your inner system. And that is where wholeness begins. Integration also requires alignment between thought, emotion, and behavior. When you think one thing, feel another, and act in opposition, you fragment yourself. Every time you say yes while your heart says no, you cut away a piece of truth. Every time you pretend to be fine while chaos brews inside, you push authenticity into the shadows. Over time, you lose not only connection with others, but with yourself. Integration is about returning to your root, saying what is real, doing what aligns with your true values, even if it's not always comfortable. Strangely, when you live in wholeness, the world responds differently. People sense the unbroken energy within you. Relationships become clearer. Boundaries become easier to set. Decisions become more coherent. Because when you're no longer internally torn, you don't need to perform, you simply show up.